And I'm Chris Conrad. I work as a cannabis expert in the court. And you would all do me a favor and stop getting busted so I don't have to do that work anymore. I'd have a lot more time to spend on doing other things like legalizing pot. But anyway, since the panel here is talking about the whole tax and regulate scheme, I want to give you a little bit of a background on this whole thing because, you know, on the one hand, tax and regulate sounds like a great idea for nowadays. But when we look back at history, we see that the first national law against marijuana was the Marijuana Tax Act. So the idea was that was supposed to be taxing and regulating, but in fact of the matter, it was a fraud, that they had set up a law that was in fact a prohibition, and they treated it as if it was a tax law. And it wasn't until 1969 when Timothy Leary challenged it that the United States Supreme Court ruled that it's not really a, this is slipping down further, that it was in fact not a tax but a prohibition. And so as a result of that, we ended up with the Controlled Substances Act, which is the current federal law that we have to deal with right now. One of the things that I think I want to do here is to kind of just run down a little bit about the changing image of marijuana over time, because in order to understand where we're going, you want to see where we've been. And of course, prior to the 1930s, the image of marijuana was nobody knew what it was. Hemp was a farm crop that people were growing. You could get cannabis from your pharmacist. If you went to some kind of a Turkish exhibit at the World Fair, for example, you might be able to smoke some hash and so forth. But most people really didn't know what it was, which is why they used that word to make cannabis unlawful at the time, or to make an unlawful law prohibiting cannabis. That's the way I would have to look at it, since it was overturned later on. But the idea was, at the time, was that they sold the Marijuana Tax Act was that marijuana was connected to axe murderers. In fact, the most famous case is the Licata axe murder case in Florida. And so people were told that when you smoke marijuana, 6 months later you might suddenly grab an axe and kill your parents and things like that. So that's why people were so willing to accept the law when it was first introduced to them. However, once the Controlled Substances Act came along, that was after Timothy Leary had the Marijuana Tax Act declared unconstitutional. And at that point, they used a different image of pot. They used the hippie draft dodger that was supposed to scare people, because even though marijuana wasn't making people go insane and kill people, they were admitting that that wasn't happening so much. But it was the destruction of society with these people who were against capitalism and they were for saving the environment, and they didn't like to wear shoes, and by God, they smoked pot, and that was like going to destroy society. So they used this fear of the other, the countercultural individual who's going to wind up somehow thwarting society's ability to function. And that's what they used as an excuse when they made the Controlled Substances Act. But things continue to change, and so by the time we get to Proposition 215, the image of the marijuana user changed quite dramatically, because by talking about medical marijuana, people with serious health conditions and so forth, it became a matter of the person in a wheelchair became the image of a marijuana smoker, as someone who the only way that they're going to maintain themselves is by smoking marijuana in their wheelchair. And when the cops come in and bust people, they're dragging out the guy in the wheelchair. And so that made it easy for people to, in fact, when the DEA, the state raided Dennis Peron's club during the campaign for Prop 215, I think that actually helped the campaign, because they were saying, oh, look, this out-of-control dispensary, and what the news media showed was them with guns, armed thug police in there with guns, dragging out people in wheelchairs, dragging out little old ladies and things like that. So they got actually a black eye from that, and that helped move things forward. The confusion after Prop 215 led to this next image of the marijuana user and the sources of marijuana, which is the heroic grower who took great risks in order to provide free medicine to these patients. And they were totally self-sacrificing, and they were being arrested by the police all the time, and that was something that needed to be handled. And that's why the legislature got involved and said, well, we need a law that will keep these heroic growers and providers of marijuana from going to jail. So they came up with SB 420, which is a little bit of a patchwork, but what it does very clearly in section 11362.775 is it says that patients who are associated within the state of California collectively or cooperatively to cultivate marijuana for medical use are immune from a whole series of laws, including sales, maintaining a place where marijuana is sold, possession, cultivation, and transportation. So this created this opportunity where people could actually sell marijuana legally. And the police, of course, said that didn't really mean what it said, but when we had this People versus Honor decision, the court held that, yes, when it says that you're immune from the statute that says you can't sell marijuana, that means that you can sell marijuana. And so after that happened, the image of the cannabis community got changed again, because once that was held up by the court, and once the Supreme Court's ruled against Angel Rach, that was important, because if the Supreme Court had supported Angel Rach's position that as long as the marijuana is not being sold, as long as it's only for the most sick people, as long as it's all within California, then it's okay, but nothing else is, then that would have put a very limited group of people that would be immune from the federal law, and everybody else would be even more targeted. But what the Supreme Court held and said was, we don't care how sick you are, we don't care if it's only California, we don't care if you're giving money or not, we're going to allow the feds to go after you. And so a lot of people who thought, well, if I'm taking the same risk by carrying some pot in my pocket as I am by selling marijuana to a sick and dying person, well, I might as well sell some marijuana too. And we had this plethora of dispensaries opening up around the state that has happened since 2004. And of course, once that happened, that's when the Board of Equalization decided, well, this sounds interesting to us because there's a lot of tax money that could be generated. And this caused quite a lot of excitement within our movement, because people were saying, well, we don't pay taxes when we get our prescription drugs. Why should we pay tax when we buy marijuana, medical marijuana? And the answer is because marijuana is not a prescription drug. In California, it's an over-the-counter drug, like aspirin is. Now, if you go to the store and you buy aspirin, you have to pay tax. So when you go to the store and you buy a marijuana, well, you have to pay tax. Now, the difference is a bottle of aspirin is a couple dollars, and a bag of herb can be rather expensive. So the amount of taxes are significantly different. But nonetheless, that's the reason. And so if people want to stop paying taxes, what that would require is that we have to get the DEA to reschedule marijuana, doctors to start writing prescriptions, and pharmacies to be selling it to you. Then you will be out of the tax loop. Most of the people I know would prefer to just pay the taxes and avoid all that, because it's going to be somewhere between difficult and impossible to get the feds to change their policy anyway. But the problem was that after SB 420 got passed, that the image of the marijuana community started to change again. It became guys who were like making a lot of money selling pot, pretending it's medical when it's really not, and so forth and so on. And so we have a lot of court cases where the prosecution will say, well, yeah, the law says that a bona fide patient and a qualified patient and a verified caregiver can do these things together, but that's not what's going on here. This individual is pretending to be a patient, and they're pretending to be a collective, and they're really breaking the law. And so they continue to go after people with that image. And so this has put us into a rather interesting situation, because there are a lot of people who feel that what's going on with the medical marijuana situation is that anybody can get a recommendation. Once you have your recommendation, it's kind of like being able to use marijuana without being sick and so forth. And so they're kind of dubious about it. And I think that that's actually helped us come forward with the idea of taxing and regulating for all adults. Because the only way that you're going to be able to straighten that out, given the fact that the voters passed an initiative and the legislature has this other law, is that we're going to have to find a system to allow adults to get access to marijuana that doesn't bring it into the medical marijuana paradigm. And so when we hit that situation, of course, this is the same time as we're starting to see these initiatives come out. And so, and a lot of people arguing about the initiatives are saying that they don't like the rules that are required by these initiatives. They like the old Proposition 19, the 1972 marijuana is legal approach. And they say marijuana should be like tomatoes. You grow it, you use it, and that's all there is to it. But the fact of the matter is that you're not smoking your tomatoes. And if you need medical relief, a tomato's not going to do it for you. So it's not really like tomatoes. They don't have secondhand smoke. They don't have all these properties that cannabis has. And I'm telling people who say, well, it should be like tomatoes, is when you start smoking tomatoes instead of smoking pot, then we can make that argument. But as long as you're using it differently than a tomato, you have to look at it differently. And you have to look at it from the point of view that the society is looking at it, which is that they are not necessarily convinced that they want everybody to have as much marijuana as they can all the time with no rules. They want to have some kind of a system of controls. And so we've got the Amiano bill that's coming forth to the legislature. We've also got these 4 initiatives that are out there, which I would like to just briefly summarize. The first one, in order of the way they were filed, was the tax and regulated, CCI was the first one. That one's the one that puts a $50 tax on marijuana sales, but it strikes down all the current laws and then allows the legislature to create another system. Well, the problem with that is, of course, is that from many people's point of view, is that it creates this window when there are no regulations, and society is a little afraid of that. I like it. You might like it, but we have to think of what the voters are going to vote for and how they're going to feel about that. And in many ways, that takes the approach of you start off with an unregulated system and you try to bring in more regulations into it. Tax scenario like 2010 takes a different approach. It allows for just the 1 ounce and the 25 square feet and an affirmative defense for more than that, but it protects all your Proposition 215 and SB 420 rights, and you're going to hear more about this, so I'm not going to give you details about this whole thing. But basically, it starts up a very restrictive system, and it then allows the legislature to bring those restrictions down, with the concept being that society might be afraid of it, so we give them something in a very controlled environment, and then when they become used to seeing their neighbors using marijuana, seeing the local coffee shop selling marijuana, then you can approach them, your city council, and so forth, and get them to bring those restrictions down, and it will be a process of maybe 15, 20 years or whatever, as we slowly spread. Now that sounds like a long time, but you got to realize, Dale here has been involved with this for 20 plus years. I've been involved with this for 20 plus years. 20 years, it goes by, whether you think it's going to or not. Then there's the California Hemp Initiative, or the Hemp and Health Initiative, also called the Jack Herer Initiative. That one takes a much broader approach than the others because it incorporates medical marijuana, industrial hemp, and adult use of marijuana all together, and it makes it rather similar to the wine model in that you can produce 200 gallons of wine for your own use and to share with your friends. Under the California Hemp Initiative, you can produce, is it 10 pounds or 12 pounds of marijuana to use for yourself or to share for your friends, which sounds good to me. I'm not sure how the average voter feels about that, though, and so, you know, we have to always remember that when you do these initiatives, part of the idea is getting it passed. And then the last one is the Common Sense Initiative, which simply tells the legislature that they have to change this whole thing. And there's some question of whether you can really tell the legislature to do things or not. Basically, the consensus is you can't. You have to tell them, well, here's the new law. You can't tell them, make a new law. And so even though the concept of that is kind of interesting, where the constitutionality is in question, and the other factor is, of course, that it takes money to win initiatives, and so far the only one that has a kind of serious financial backing that it takes to get on the ballot is the Tax and Regulate 2010 initiative. And so I'd like for everyone to give a big hand for Richard Lee, because of what he has done in terms of working as a leader in Oakland, getting landmark activity like Measure Z and this most recent taxation initiative passed in Oakland, but he's also used the money that he's generated from his years as providing medical marijuana to people to put it into some serious legal and political changes. Many people were not doing that. I would say he's almost the only one who's doing it, and he's certainly the only one doing it to the extent that he did. Similar to what Dennis Perone did when he had his initiative that was launched out of his dispensary in San Francisco. And so we're kind of seeing a little repeat of history on that. And I think what people need to understand, though, is that when you listen to these four initiatives, you may have your own preference of which one you like, and you may have things you really don't like about certain of these initiatives. But what's ultimately going to happen is that one or two are going to end up on the ballot. And with the ones that are on the ballot, the one that gets the most votes, the parts that are in conflict with the other one, will be the ones that take effect. So the best bet for everybody right now is to try to get everything that you can to get on the ballot, and then vote for everything that's on there, and then let the voters have their say as to what actually ends up taking effect. Of course, we expect a lot of very strong and well-funded opposition to this, and so what we need to be talking about very soon is how do we make sure that once it's on the ballot, it actually gets passed. And this is what I have to say about that, is that whatever initiative gets on the ballot is the perfect initiative. It's written exactly right. There's nothing wrong with it, and everyone has to be behind it 100%, no matter what you thought about the day before it was put on the ballot. Because if we sit here, the only way, well, I shouldn't say the only way, but the main way that we can lose in the coming year is for us to fight and to snipe with one another and to bring this thing down. Proposition 215 had some serious flaws on it, but once we started collecting the signatures, we acted like it was perfect. And by God, look, we gained a lot from it. So we have to take that attitude. Electoral politics is different than sitting around, smoking a joint, and talking about what the world should really be like. It's about getting something passed and having something you can build and work from. So I do not want to hear divisiveness amongst people. You can argue about it now, you can say which one is your favorite, you can work for all of them, but once this gets on the ballot, you have to tell people to vote for the change, because if we get it on the ballot and it loses, that could be a very serious setback to us, and nobody wants to see that happen. No matter what we do, if it passes, we can make more progress, but if it loses, it could be a setback. So I'm going to make that point. And then the last little thing I wanted to point out about the approaches is that the TR 2010 initiative has a different angle because it allows the local communities a lot more power to decide how cannabis is going to be regulated. And they're going to be talking about this, so I'm not going to go any further into that, except to say that when you see what's happened in Ukiah, for example, where the city has gone, where the county of Mendocino has been known for being the source of cannabis for a long time, where there was a lot of medical marijuana support, where you had a sheriff and a DA who both supported it, and you look at what happened in that county where it flipped around, and they've got a very anti-marijuana law enforcement establishment, and so forth and so on, and you see the upset in the community. A lot of that could have been resolved by taking a slightly different approach, which was that when the community started complaining about the way that marijuana was being produced for medical purposes in their county, that instead of the growers coming forward and saying, well, here's what we can do, we can set up a code of conduct, we can start paying a production tax to the county to help make sure this is going on, we can follow rules, and we can have someone who arbitrates between the problems of the dispensaries and the growers and the community, and we can resolve this without a problem. Instead, what they did was they went into court and they said, well, screw you guys, the law says I can do this and I'm going to do it. And so it created a lot of negativity that we're going to have to overcome in the future. When we're looking at your own community and thinking how we're going to see the regulation, once TR 2010 passes, it's going to be up to each community to get in there and come up with some kind of a pattern of taxation and regulation that the local community will not only benefit from, but will understand that they have a stake in it. That it's not like the stakeholder who does no interest in the game and holds the money on the side. We're all interested parties, and so is the community, and we have to be brought in together to make this next stage. We can't think that once it passes, we get to go up and do whatever we want, because we've seen the effect of that, and that is that the people resent being told that we're here and you got to rub with it. We have to say, we're here, we're part of the community, and we want to be joined with you to make it better for everyone. And that's what tax and regulation is really all about. So thank you very much. And to my left is Jeff Jones.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. I hope everybody quickly got up to speed about how fast we've evolved this issue. I have not been involved as long as Chris Conrad and Dale Geringer. I got involved in 1994 by getting active with Cannabis Action Network in Berkeley, California, by moving out from South Dakota after my dad passed away from cancer when I was 14. I quickly got involved with the medical cannabis community because I saw, like Chris explained, a way of carving out a new niche that was acceptable and mainstreaming something that was being stigmatized by its general nature. And I think that we've moved a mountain in the last 13 to 14 years since Proposition 215 passed. We've mainstreamed something that was underground, and it's now over the counter. And I think the important thing that we have, with me being involved in this Tax Cannabis 2010 measure, I'm actually one of the co-proponents of the Tax Cannabis 2010 measure itself. And the reason why I got involved is I went to the U.S. Supreme Court and back with medical cannabis sales. And I felt that they got away with calling me a common drug dealer. No better than somebody selling cannabis out on the street corner. When I had a meticulous screening system, I had a very well-run facility that had no smoking and was endorsed by my local city government and was, at the time, the model to really make yourself after. And they pretty much trashed it. They didn't like it, they didn't want anything to do with it, so we have to push farther than what their expectations are. We have to not accept what they're saying our future is and make our own future. And understand that the fears that some of the growers have in these woods, as I say, in their caves inside and in their fields outside, is they have to come in out of those caves and out of those fields and become mainstream. And to feel that we can't give them real jobs, meaning that they can put real money in their bank accounts and buy real cars and be legitimate, is to not understand what we did with medical cannabis. 15 years ago, you couldn't run a medical cannabis facility and not get attacked by the federal government. Now you can. Now you have regulations in city governments that have lasted 4 to 5 years without having a single federal DEA intervention to them, because they're running correctly and the locals are asking the feds to butt out. And that's, I think, what we have to learn here, is we have to take an investment in what's happening locally with our future and not let somebody else make the decisions for us. So that's why we're putting forward a measure that allows the government to have some control in this, because without doing that, we're not going to get this moved forward. I was given some very important advice from an expatriate that moved to Holland in the 70s and then out of Holland in the late 90s. And he said that the reason why tolerance came to Holland was the people involved in the cannabis community started paying into the system through taxes and permit fees to the extent that the police and the system felt that they were taking out. And when it became an even keel, the government started listening to the cannabis consumers, the cannabis businesses, and started regulating them and giving them permits to dispense. And that's how soft drugs came to Holland. And we are in that same modal right now with medical cannabis, locally in some communities, such as here in Santa Rosa and Sebastopol and other parts of California. And we can make that step forward with adult use. To say that it can't happen is to ignore the last 15 years of our history of medical cannabis, starting out with Dennis's San Francisco experiment and branching out now to almost every major urban community in the state has some form of a collective that helps patients get access to it. Now, it's very disappointing that this last week's legalization hearings, they still haven't figured out how to ensure that patients have a safe and affordable access to medical cannabis. Wasn't that the intent of Prop 215 when we voted for it? That the state and the federal government would do something? Well, they've done absolutely nothing short of SB 420. And that, to me, is not clearly enough to make sure that patients are being looked after. And part of the reason why I got involved with this adult tax measure is to lessen the targets for those that are legally currently medical patients. Is that if everybody in this room right now that's over the age of 21 can legally possess an ounce of marijuana, does that make those medical patients that can possess 8 ounces less of a target to the law enforcement officer that just walked through? Completely. There are almost no targets in the room. And that's what we want to do, is level the playing field to lessen the targets that we created. It was an unknown consequence when we passed Prop 215 that the police would not back off medical patients that had their rights under the law. We felt that they would do something at least to back away from those that were legally operating. Just being a medical patient and growing in their home. We still have arrests and convictions in this state for simply doing what your doctor says is right. And we need to end that, and it's up to us to take the step forward and make sure that we're not accepting the path that the government has offered us. As you know, it's been almost 100 years, and we've had illegal cannabis in this state. And we need to change that, and I think we need to lead the nation out of this current problem. It's a ball and chain that the government has put on this plant, and we need to remove it. This plant has done nothing to us to harm us, but the government is afraid of it because it's helped us all see that there's another path. And I think that's what we have to communally move forward on. And if we have 1 or 2 ballot measures that are pending next year, we have to vote for them. If we have the Tom Amiano bill that's currently getting through the Public Safety and the Health Committee and the Assembly up for the governor's desk, we have to go out and lobby for it. We have to do the same thing when it gets to the Senate. We have to accept that they are not going to give us a favor, and we have been asking for a favor. Legalize marijuana. Why would they want to do that, as these last 2 presenters said? They've got nothing involved in it except for letting us loose in what they consider a free-for-all. If we don't operate with some controls and some regulation and some mature debate, we are not going to get what we need to move this forward. And that's the simple, short side of it. If we move forward something that is clear and concise and that the other side can understand, they'll vote for it. The more people that I've talked to outside of our community and showed the current text of our initiative, which does do some restrictions around use around underage of 21 or around trying to employ somebody that's under the age of 21 to sell or to grow cannabis, most of the people on the other side go, finally, some sanity in your argument. Finally, you're trying to do something to protect the kids, because they believe what we're doing in here is indoctrinating kids into a lifetime of drug use and abuse. We know that that's wrong, but they don't, and we need to separate that out so that they can see that we're not trying to indoctrinate their kids into something that they don't believe in. Once we get that to them, I think they're going to let us be. Because remember, the police officers that have been in and out of this facility today are not our enemies. They're here to protect and serve. And if we don't have a reason for them to come after us, they're our friends. We need to change the law, change their manpower and resource list and priorities, and make them do what we want them to do again.
Good evening, Harvest Festival. Oh, come on, you can do better than that. Good evening, Harvest Dance. Hi there. How's Sebastopol doing tonight? Come on, we gotta wake up. We got a big dance for the rest of the evening. Only 2 more hours of talking, and then you'll be able to go have some fun. All right, we appreciate y'all being here tonight. It sounds like the gentleman here left me for all the nitty-gritty details on what the Tax and Regulate Cannabis 2010 ballot initiative might actually do. So let's talk about that, shall we? Yes. I'm going to try to bring this up just a little bit. We did a poll of likely voters a few months ago, and when I say likely voters, I'm not just running out on the streets of Venice Beach saying, hey, you want to legalize pot. I'm talking about the folks that are likely to vote in the 2010 gubernatorial election, who are less likely, in fact, to vote for this measure. Before we spent the time, the energy, the money, the focus, asking you to go out there and help us do it, we wanted to make sure this thing could pass. We found out two very important things you need to know tonight. 80% agree, and this is all Americans, that our current policy has failed. So most of us agree on that. Current policy has in fact failed. The other thing that we found out in this group of very conservative voters, most likely to vote in 2010, that over 50% would vote for this, which told us we do have a shot at making this happen. Speaking of any of you that have not signed yet, if you are qualified to vote in California, we have two tables going on. One right over here to my right, and then one straight back up against the wall. You can see him waving back there, so any of you that still need to sign, please go visit him. And little Topsy, the cute little dog over there. Yes. Shout out to the dog. She's been our mascot. So we agree that current policy has failed, and what we'd like to do with this, with the Tax and Regulate 2010 measure, is to legalize for all adults over 21 a full ounce of cannabis, no matter who you are, patient or not, over 21. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is this explicitly protects any patient currently under Prop 215 or SB 420. This does not in any way circumvent those protections. So patients, you have the gold card. You still get your 8 ounces. But if you're a grown-up, if you're an adult, you can now make the safer choice over alcohol and have your ounce of cannabis wherever you may be in the entire state of California, period. Now this also, thank you, yes, that's a good thing. Let's take the target off the backs of these patients so the smell of pot is no longer probable cause, shall we? So the second thing that it's going to do for any adult over 21 is be able to grow a small amount for personal cultivation. We're trying to keep this mom and pop. We don't want the cigarette and the tobacco companies and the alcohol companies just swooping in and taking it away and charging you more. This is so you can grow your own in your closet. Now it's important as we talk about the compromise with concerned parents that you're going to come in and turn your whole house next door into a big grow operation and then burn them down. There have to be certain regulations. When we talk about the verbiage here, legalization, these moms hear free-for-all. They freak out. We're not going to legalize without strict controls. So if we talk about this and talking about regulation and controlling cannabis, it's easier to have the conversation with those that are concerned about these things. So you can have 25 square feet as an adult to grow your own. Now whatever you have grown in your 5x5, you have an affirmative defense in any court of law. So it still sets up an affirmative defense for way more than your ounce at home. This is so what you do in the privacy of your home is now your business. This will also set up, as he mentioned earlier, it's so vital, and I must say the secret to the success of both Richard Lee and Mr. Jeff Jones, because I must say they've both been quite successful, is their tendency to be focused on the policy making. And it's up to us to continue to take that responsibility on a local level with our cities and counties to determine new best practices to regulate adult sales. This sets that up. So each city, each county has an opportunity to opt in to regulating adult sales. It also gives opportunities for cities like Los Angeles, whose city attorney believes that sales simply aren't legal under current California law, Long Beach. In fact, there's an awful lot of towns down south that don't think we've passed Prop 215 yet. This gives them a law to point to say, yes, I can regulate sales. Even if they don't touch adult sales, this gives them the law to regulate sales for patients. They can choose how to tax, if tax, and then regulate simple sales to patients, which right now is in flux, as you know, down in the southern environments. They're trying to shut down every dispensary. So this voter initiative would give that opportunity. More importantly, the federal government now has a state law they can point to and say, look, they are operating legally under California state law based on the local regulations, and the feds can back off under their own, exactly. The important thing to remember right now is even though the current policy has shifted, that it's only policy that shifted, it's still nothing but a memo. So this would indoctrinate those rules in law and allow it to be adjudicated from there. It's really up to us on a local level. The next step that this does is set up the opportunity for commercial cultivation. So cities like Oakland can actually set up grow operations and get permitted and tax it and have it exist safe from federal interference. So we have those opportunities within each state. Oakland already passed Measure F to tax any cannabis-related activity. So they're already set up to tax adult sales, adult commercial cultivation. However they want to take it, they can take it. I think Oakland's definitely going to lead it. There's, I believe, 7 localities that have already passed similar measures that are ready and willing to take a look at local regulation for adult sales and commercial cultivation. And we can't forget hemp. Currently, the only way that our manufacturers can work with hemp is to import it. And the fact that our farmers can't grow it is a travesty. This will set up the opportunity for local governments and cities to set up cultivation for hemp as well. We just finally got the first hemp license given out in Montana, and California can do that too. Those farmers in Fresno have that opportunity to grow this very important cash crop. Anything that you guys want to add about the local? I would invite any of you to go to taxcannabis.org to find out more information. We've had a lot of amazing individuals talk about endorsing the tax and regulate idea. And it's not just the initiative that Oaksterdam University, Richard Lee, and Jeff Jones are putting forth. It's also the bill with Tom Amiano, which I'm quite excited to say they're looking at changing the verbiage, from what I understand, to perhaps reflect that we don't have to wait for federal law to change. They're looking at maybe just going ahead and trying to drive through this effort without waiting for the federal law. Yep. Any questions?
Yeah, the question was whether the regulations on hemp could be such as to prevent pollination of more marijuana. I would have to say that, first off, the local regulations can be designed however they want, pretty much according to Tax and Regulate 2010. If the hemp initiative passes, that doesn't have anything like that. It just allows hemp farming. So in that case, the communities could not do that kind of regulating. I would say that, however, if you look at Holland, they have good marijuana and they have good hemp both growing there. So these are not as incompatible as you would think, because basically you're trying to grow without seed. So if you've got somebody down the road who's growing 50 acres of hemp, that probably means you shouldn't grow your medical marijuana right there, or the marijuana quality stuff. So we will have an idea. And also, one of the things, the advantage of having a regulated system where people get some kind of permit to grow hemp, as opposed to everybody can grow hemp, which I prefer actually everybody just being able to. But one of the advantages of having a regulated system is that would give you the opportunity as a medical cannabis patient or whatever to go and find out where hemp is being grown around you, and then you can work it out with the farmers or keep an eye on wind and things like that that could affect your grow, because there will be a record at the local municipality keeping track of that. So that's my initial impression. Jen?
The last hemp bill that they introduced that was vetoed by Schwarzenegger chose 5 counties up north to try to grow it in experimentally. I think that once you see wholesale hemp farming in California, the valley is going to be very difficult to grow outdoors, except for in a greenhouse.